As early as 1914 and 1915, long before the United States officially entered the war, some Americans were already volunteering in France, driving ambulances, and even fighting in the French army. It was said that there were thousands of Americans volunteering before the declaration of war. Many of these volunteers were children of privilege from America's Ivy League universities. Not all of them were from Harvard, but they became famous as the Harvard Volunteers. Their letters and newspaper articles published throughout the U.S. publicized the suffering of the French, British, and Belgians. America belonged at their side, they believed, and idealistic young people would shame the U.S. into the war. Alan Seeger was one of those Harvard volunteers. He was an unlikely soldier. He was a poet out of Harvard. Along with his cultured New York family of musicians and writers, he had traveled the world as a young man. After graduating from Harvard in 1910, he wound up in Paris like so many hopeful artists looking for fun. Among the bohemians of the left bank, he lived a romantic life of wine, women, and song. Finding himself, we might say today. Something snapped in Seeger in 1914 when the Germans invaded France and advanced within a few miles of Paris. He wrote to his mother, Paris, to whom they owed the happiest moments of their lives. Paris was in peril. Without renouncing their nationality, they had yet chosen to make their homes here beyond any other city in the world. Did not the benefits and blessings they had received point them a duty that heart and conscience could not deny? Seeger had found his purpose. He joined the French Foreign Legion within a month of the invasion. Among the Americans who volunteered, Seeger was unique. Many of his American compatriots soon grew sick of life in the trenches and left for the more comfortable but still dangerous life as airplane pilots. Yet, Seeger stayed in the trenches. A brilliant writer, his letters to the New York papers were the closest look that Americans got of the war. One reads, "The poor common soldier's role is simply to dig himself a hole in the ground and to keep hidden in it as tightly as possible." Continually under the fire of the opposing batteries, he is never allowed to get a glimpse of the enemy. He is condemned to sit like an animal in his burrow, hearing the shells whistle over his head and taking their daily toll from his comrades. Seeger felt a spiritual bond with the common French soldiers and the suffering French people. He described for American readers the fatalistic, almost suicidal reaction of the French people to the thousands of lives lost to defend France. "Come to love France," he wrote to his mother, "and understand the almost unexampled nobility of the effort this admirable people is making, for that will be the surest way of your finding comfort for anything I am ready to suffer in their cause." Some unnameable feeling kept Seeger in the trenches. He seemed to enjoy the war. Combat stripped away the veneer of a cultured man and left an ancient warrior. In all its horror, the war allowed modern men to feel a power they had never known. Seeger described hearing a scream at night on the battlefield. He wrote, "In that cry, all the evolution of the centuries was leveled. I seemed to hear the yell of the warrior of the Stone Age over his fallen enemy." It was one of those antidotes to civilization this war can offer so many seekers after extraordinary sensations. An attack of bronchitis in March 1916 gave Seeger a month's leave in his beloved Paris. "I lived," Seeger wrote of that month, "as though I were saying goodbye to life." On July 4th, 1916, he was back in the muddy trenches in northern France. Seeger wasn't even supposed to be in the trenches that day. A group of American volunteers were having a 4th of July celebration in Paris, and Seeger had been granted leave to go, but the paperwork never made it to his unit. Instead, he was awaiting an order for his unit to go over the top and attack the German trenches in front of them. The fighting was the French part of the Battle of the Somme. West of where Seeger was, the British Army had attacked the Germans 3 days before, and 20,000 British soldiers died in a single day. Now it was France's turn. French artillery pounded the German trenches for days. Seeger was excited. He wrote before the battle that, "I am glad to be going in the first wave. If you are in this thing at all, it is best to be in it to the limit, and this is the supreme experience." The artillery guns stopped, and Seeger heard machine guns firing to the left. The order came to attack. Seeger climbed the ladder out of the trench and started running toward the German lines. Over there, most of the Germans had survived the bombardment. They climbed out of bunkers and manned machine guns. French soldiers ran at them with rifles and bayonets, and the German machine guns cut them down like wheat at harvest time. Seeger was hit in the chest with a machine gun round. He spun and hit the ground, but he didn't die right away. French soldiers who survived told the story of how he cheered on the soldiers coming up behind him. They found his body on the battlefield the next day, along with hundreds of others. He was buried where he fell. The French government posthumously awarded Seeger the Croix de Guerre, France's decoration for acts of heroism. Seeger's first book of poems was published the year he died. His best-known poem, Rendezvous, was an eerie prediction. The first verse reads, "I have a rendezvous with death at some disputed barricade. When spring comes back with rustling shade and apple blossoms fill the air, I have a rendezvous with death when spring brings back blue days and fair."
How do you feel now, Bill?